Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Tevואו על הארץ, when you enter into the land. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse on Shabbos Parshas Achrei Kedoshim in the year Tavshin Chav Ches, on the 13th day of the month of Iyar, 55 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse in the Torah portion where it says, "Tevואו על הארץ," when you enter into the land, "Unatatem kol eitz machal," and you're going to plant a fruit-bearing tree. So the Torah says, "Araltem as arlasai," which means the tree is, so to speak, forbidden, blocked off, and for 3 years, shalosh shanim yilachem areilim, for 3 years it's blocked up, it's forbidden. Lo yeyachal, you can't eat. So for the first 3 years of a fruit tree, you're not allowed to eat it. On the 4th year, Vashana Revius in the 4th year, Yelachem Kodesh, it's going to be holy, Hilulim Hashem. And on the 5th year, Vashana Chamishis, you can go ahead and eat the fruit. And then the Torah uses an interesting expression, Lachoisif Lachem Tvuasai, to add to you the produce. And then it says, Ani Hashem, I am God. So that's the verse in the Torah portion. Now, the Rebbe says, the seeming understanding of the verse is that when you come into the land, you're going to plant a tree, a fruit-bearing tree. In other words, what's the purpose of coming into the land? Not just to sit there and do nothing, but to plant trees in the land of Israel. What type of trees? Trees that produce fruit. It's called eitz machal, a tree that produces fruit that you can eat. So if that's the case, if the whole intent is to come to the land and to plant trees, so you can have fruit trees, so you can eat from it, so why for the first 3 years can't you eat it? In other words, as it says clearly, the first 3 years are forbidden to eat from it. And even already in the 4th year, you can't eat it where you're at, but it has to be holy, and you have to take it to Jerusalem, and then only in the 5th year are you able to eat it. So again, the question is a simple question. If the whole intent is to come to the land, to plant fruit trees, why can't we eat it? And the 4th year, it's questionable, only in the 5th year. Also, we have to understand, what does it say in the 5th year? In other words, it says you can eat it in the 5th year. And what happens in the 6th, and the 7th, and the 8th? You can eat it for all the years afterwards as well. So why is it only mentioned the 5th year? And as he should have said, from the 5th and onward. Or and we find this expression in the Torah where it says, from the 8th day and on, etc. So it could have said the 5th year and on. Okay. Also, we have to understand, the verse says, Lachoisif lachem tvuasai. It's going to be, the produce is going to be an abundance. Obviously, when the Torah says lahaisif, an abundance, it's talking about an intense, an infinite type of abundance. In other words, why is the Torah saying this? Because the fact is, when you look at all the other mitzvahs, the reward is commensurate to the mitzvah. In other words, in reference to when a person does a mitzvah, commandment, so there's a reward. So there's actually two opinions how the reward works. The one opinion is that it's a cause and effect. You do this mitzvah, you get this reward. You do this mitzvah, you get that reward, etc. Or you do a mitzvah and you get a reward, but it's not necessarily commensurate to the actual mitzvah you did. So it's more monumental. And it's a big argument between the Rishonim exactly how the reward works. Again, whether it's a cause and effect or it's just a symbolic idea. But irrelevant, according to both opinions, the reward has to do with the mitzvah on some level. However, here, no, the haisip, it's infinite. So the question is, why is Arla different? That the reward is that if you keep it, that means for 3 years you don't have any benefit. In the 4th, you bring it to Jerusalem, so then you get this infinite reward. Why specifically is this one that you get this huge reward? In other words, obviously in all the mitzvahs you get a reward. But the Torah goes out of its way to say, no, I'm going to give you a special bracha. So what's this special infinite blessing? Also, at the end, the verse says, Ani Hashem. We don't find it by other mitzvahs. Hashem says, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, by the end of the mitzvahs. The question is, why does it say Ani Hashem? So the Rebbe brings from the Tzemach Tzedek, the 3rd Chabad Rebbe, and he has a Chassidic discourse on this verse. So he brings from one of the commentaries on the Torah called the Bachayai. And the Bechaya explains as follows. He gives actually many, many insights into the whole idea of the Orla, the 4th year and the 5th year, and then he brings the Tzemach Tzedek, what the Bechaya says, and he says as follows. According to Kabbalah, according to the esoteric teaching of the Torah, what is the mitzvah of Orla, which is forbidden to eat it for the first 3 years? In other words, the Torah kept us away from benefiting from the fruit for the first 3 years, is because that the first 3 years corresponds to the 3 high levels. And because it's so high, we don't have an ability to comprehend it and connect to it. Or like for example, the Bechai says that it's comparable to when Hashem created the world. It says, "V'haaretz haisa sayu v'voyu v'choshech." It was chaos. It was darkness, and then obviously God went in and created the light. So notice that what the Bechai is saying is the source of the 3 years comes from a very, very high level, Toyu v'choy v'choshech, and that's why we don't have any benefit from it. Now, that's what the Tzemach Tzedek brings from the Bechai. But then the Tzemach Tzedek explains, and he says as follows: what's these high levels? So he says, in the world of Kabbalah, we know everything is built on the Sfirot. So the first 3 years is connected to the Keter, the highest Sfirah, Chachma, and Bina. In other words, and we're talking in the world of Atzilut. So what does that mean? Since you're talking about Keter, Chachma, and Bina, which is higher than the human comprehension, and that's why we're not allowed to eat it. Again, so far we have from the Bechai that says it's connected to a very, very high level, which again is Toyu Voyu V'choshech. The Tzemach Tzedek is connected to the idea of what? Keter, Chachma, and Bina. And the Bechaya continues on to explain, so that's the first 3 years, that the 4th year corresponds to what it says in the Torah, "V'ruach Elokim arachefes al pnei hamayim." The Spirit of God was hovering over the water. So in other words, it's not a complete concealment, and it's not something which you totally can't comprehend, but it's hovering over. So the same thing also, the 4th year, it's not 100% permissible, and it's not forbidden, but you're able to redeem it, and take it to Jerusalem. And obviously, if you don't redeem it, you're not allowed to have any benefit from it. So that's the Bechai says. But the Tzemach Tzedek explains, what does it mean on a spiritual level? It's the sphere of what? It's sphere of das. Again, just to recap. The Bechai says the first 3 years is Toyu Voyu V'choshech. The Tzemach Tzedek says connect the Keser Chachma and Bina. It's not a contradiction, they're just explaining a deeper concept. The 4th year, so the Bechai says, connect to Ruach Elokim Arachefes, and the Tzemach Tzedek explains it's connected what? To the Sfira of Das. In other words, and now the Rebbe is going to explain what's the connection with Das. Because we know the Rebbe explains that Das, so on one hand, it's part of the Chachma and Bina, it's part of the intellectual world, but nevertheless, Das is already connected to the emotions, the 6 emotions. Like it's called, it's in Kabbalah, it's Maftecha de Kol Shis. It's the opening that has within it the 6 Sfirot of Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, that's a Chod Yesod. In other words, even though Das is an intermediary between Chachma and Bina and the Midos, so in other words, it's connected to, so to speak, higher than Atzilut and Atzilut, between Keser, Chachma, and Bina, which is off the charts, but nevertheless, since Das, so we know the spheres, the way they work is Chachma is right, Bina is left, and Das is center. Same thing, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes is center. But since Das is a center sphera, so in other words, since it's a center one, it's connected on high, on below, on all levels. In other words, it's like the concept of truth. In truth, there's no one truth here, one truth there. It permeates everything. So just like truth permeates everything, a center sphere permeates everything. So Das has the ability to connect to Chachma and Bina, but also has the ability to connect to the Midos. So obviously, just like it's on high and connected to Keter and Chachma and Bina, it also has a relationship and a way to connect on the lower spheres. So therefore, because it has that magical touch that it can connect to Keser, Chachma, and Bina and connect to the Midos, so that's why that's the quality of Das. And since it's something which is an intermediary, so therefore what happens in the 4th year, you're allowed to eat it, but it has certain restrictions. It has to be eaten the holy way in Jerusalem. So again, so what the Tzemach Tzedek is explaining here is that again, the first 3 years, Keser, Chachma, Bina, so therefore we can't touch it. The 4th year is connected to Das. Das is on one hand connected to Keser, Chachma, Bina, so that's why there's restrictions. But on the other hand, it's connected to Midas. That's why ultimately we can enjoy it. Obviously, if you redeem it and take it into Yerushalayim. Now, So Rabbi asked a question. He said like this. What did we just learn? We learned that that the first 3 years is connected to a very, very high level. Kesach Chachma Bina. But how does this make sense? What the Alter explains in Kutei Torah, based on what it says in the Zohar, that the 3 years of Arla is connected to the Shalosh Klipos Atmeyos, the 3 impure klipot. So it's like two opposites. One hand, the Sefer brings and he says it's connected to Kesach Chachma, the highest levels. That's why we can't touch it. Okay, but then the Alter brings in the Zohar that's connected to the 3 klipot Atmeyot. So Rebbe explains and he says as follows. He explains it based on what it says in the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, in reference to the lion and the ox. In other words, the fact is like this: the lion, in its source, is much higher than the ox. Like we know in the Kisei HaKavod, so it says Pnei Aryeh al Yamin. The lion is on the right side, and the ox is on the left side. So think about this: on high, the lion is on the right side. The shur is on the left side. The ox is on the left side. What happens down in this world? The ox is a kosher animal, and the lion is an impure animal. It's seemingly, if the lion is the one that's on the right, it should be the kosher animal down here, and the ox that's on the left, it should be the non-kosher animal down here. But the Rebbe says, no, that's exactly the point. Because the lion is so high, it's on the Kisei HaKavod on the right side. So when the so to speak, when the vessels broke, and when the lion came down in this physical world, the way it's down here, because we know the rule is Kol HaGavoya b'Yoser Yored Lamata b'Yoser. Anything that's high, when it comes crashing down, it comes crashing down much lower. So therefore, because the lion is on the right side, on high, when it comes down here, it's unfortunately impure. However, the face of the ox is only on the left side, and it's lower than the lion. So even though it's in the chariot, but when it comes down here, it remains kosher. In other words, even when it comes down here, it doesn't get disconnected because it wasn't so high. So in other words, so what do you see from here? That the lion, in its source, it's much higher. When it comes down, unfortunately, it's impure. The ox, it's not so high. It's lower than the lion, but when it comes down here, it remains kosher. So based on this, Rebbe explains beautifully, this is the reference to what? The first 3 years of Arla. In its source, the first 3 years of Arla, where they connect to on a very, very high level. Their level, like the Tzemach Tzedek said, Keter Chachma Bina. However, when they come down here, because it was so high, it falls so low, and it's connected, unfortunately, to 3 klipot atmeyot, the 3 impure klipot, which is forbidden to eat and forbidden to have any benefit. Up to the point where the Alter writes in Tanya, and he gives an example of 3 klipot atmeyot. He gives an example from Arla. So what the Rebbe explained just now is to recap that on one hand we just learned that the first 3 years is connected to very, very high. And on one hand, why is it part of the 3 klipot atmeyot? And the answer is, he gives the example, just like from the lion, which is higher in the Kisei HaKavod. When it comes down here, it's impure. The shur is a drop lower. When it comes down, it's pure. The same thing also, the first 3 years. In its source, it's very, very high. Kesach Chachma Bina. But when it comes down here, unfortunately, it goes into the 3 klipot atmeyot. So Rebbe says, seemingly, we have to understand. 1 second. The fact is, God created the world, and He put us in the world, and the purpose is that we should serve Hashem in this world. As it says in the prophet, Gamas ha'olam nasim b'libam. God gave this world in our heart, and we should transform the world. In other words, the whole purpose Hashem created the world is so we should be here and transform and elevate the world. So if that's the case, how do we transform and elevate the 3 klipot atmeyot? If the first 3 years we can't eat the produce, so there's no blessing, you can't elevate it. We're here to elevate stuff. The first 3 years, let's work it out. Let's transform it. And Rebbe says he's going to explain it based on what's explained in the Hasidic discourses, the difference between transformation, in Hebrew it's called avodas habirurim, and test. There are certain tests. In other words, the transformation of the 3 impure klipot, the way you transform it is by resisting, engaging in it. In other words, by not getting involved in it. And it bothers you, that's how you create the transformation. So it's a powerful idea. Certain things we are mevarer, certain things we transform, and certain things it's test, not to touch it. Now, when you overcome the test of not touching it, that's how you transform it. So the three certain things, let's say, are kosher, you make a blessing, you eat it, you elevate it. Certain things that are not kosher, the way to elevate it is by refraining from touching it or engaging with it. So the same thing applies to the three klipot tatmeot. Yes, we're here to transform it. The way you transform it is don't touch it. And this, they're explaining deeper, this is the basic difference between the 365 negative precepts and the 248 positive precepts. Why? Because the fact is, the 248 positive mitzvot, how do you transform them? By engaging in it. Every mitzvah, tefillin, you put on tefillin, kashrut, you keep kosher, Shabbat, you keep Shabbat. So every one of the 248 commandments, of the positive ones, how do you elevate them? By doing it. But how do you deal with the 365 that you can't do? Not from a close place, but by not touching it. I don't want it. I don't have nothing to do with it. That's the way we transform. In other words, so the question is, what's higher? By doing a positive mitzvah or refraining from a negative mitzvah? So the Rebbe says that specifically, when you transform by abstaining 365 commandments, and by the pain that you have from it, you reach much higher. And let's explain in the classical teachings of the Rebbe Rashab in the year Tafrei Shamach Vav, that through pain you reach the level of tainig, which is the highest part of Keser. So the way to transform things that you can't do is actually by not doing it, and it's actually even higher. And through the pain of not doing it, you actually reach a deeper tainig, a deeper satisfaction. Now, after we go through the avodah for 3 years, think about it, you planted a tree and it's producing beautiful fruit, you'd love to have it, but you can't. Hashem says no. So for 3 years, you practice restraint, you don't touch it. And for literally day in, day out, for 3 years, you practice restraint. So what happens is then in the 4th year, you're able to elevate it in Yerushalayim, but then when you finally come to the 4th year, the restraint does not that benefit unless it's in the right spot. But what happens when it comes to the 5th year? Then the Torah says lahoisef lechem tuvasoi. In other words, now you're going to have this huge, infinite blessing. Why is that? Because what's the source of the first 3 years that you didn't benefit from it? The source of Arla, is from the Keser Chachma Bina. So therefore, when you transform it down here by not engaging it, you actually connect to the source. Like there was actually in Yiddish, and nemter zeir sheirish, you grab the source. And that, by grabbing the source, that will give you the most powerful blessings. And that's the first 3 of Keser Chachma Bina. But how do we activate it? How do we connect to the source of Keser Chachma Bina? By specifically practicing restraint. So what happens then is, in the 5th year, you have lahoisif lechem tuvasai. You have a whole different level of blessing. But again, it's only the 5th only comes after you did the avoid of 3 and 4. When you practice the avoid of the 3 years, restraint, you're not doing anything. So what are you connecting to the source? And then when the 5th year, when you're able to consume it, you're actually bringing it into your world. And that gives you the greatest blessings. And now the Rebbe goes on deeper and he explains like this. What is the whole idea of the 5th year? So we know in Hashem's name, there's the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. Four letters. Now, on top of the Yud, there's something which is called the Koitze Shel Yud, the dot on top of the Yud. It's not a letter. Yud is a letter. The dot is it's not a letter. It's a dot. But on the other hand, it's above the letters. What is the dot which is above the letter? That's connected to the idea of Keter. So what happens is you connect to the dot above the Yud, which is Keser. Like the Rebbe says, it's explained at length in the Alter Rebbe's Tanya in Geras HaTshuva. So this is the whole idea of what? Of the 5th year. What's the 5th year? The 5th year is connected to the dot above the letter Yud, which is higher than the 4 letters of Yud, Hey, and Vav, Hey, because we know that the Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey of Hashem's name is connected to what? To the 10 Sfiros. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey is connected to how is it connected to 10 Sfiros? Because the Yud, the dot, the letter Yud, is connected to the Sfira of Chachma. The first Hey is connected to what? To Bina. And the Vav is connected to 6 Midot. and the last hey is connected to Malchus. So again, so Yud is Chachma, Hey is Bina, Vav is a 6 midot, and the last Hey is Malchus. What's the koitzei sheyud, the dot and top? That's Keser. That's the crown. And that's the reward in the crown is where Hashem adds, which is basically, it adds, which is even higher than the reward of all the mitzvahs. Why? Why is that? Because all the mitzvahs is connected to where? To Yud Kei Vav Kei. And like the Zohar says clearly, that there are mitzvahs that are connected to the Yud Kei Vav Kei. So he says in Aramaic, Amba de Talia Ba'atakla, just like grapes that are hanging on its branch. In other words, there are certain mitzvahs that are connected to the Yud of Yud Kei Vav Kei. There are certain mitzvahs that are connected to what? To the Hey, the first Hey. And there are certain mitzvahs that are connected to the Vav, and there are certain mitzvahs that are connected to the last Hey. So therefore, what happens is like this. When you do a mitzvah, since every mitzvah is either connected to the Yud or the Hey or the Vav Hey. So when you do a mitzvah, what are you doing? You're drawing down one of the letters, whether it's Yud Hey or Vav Hey. So that's why every mitzvah, when you do a mitzvah, the reward is commensurate to the mitzvah, because it's connected to Yud Hey or Vav Hey. And whether it's a cause and effect, or if it's just a symbolic idea. But the fact is, it's connected to Yud or Hey or Vav Hey. So therefore, it's a finite reward, so to speak. However, when you fulfill the mitzvah of Arla, what are you connecting to? You're connecting to the koitzei shel Yud, the dot on top, which is connected to Kesach Chachmima, and that's why the reward is l'hoisel l'chem tuasei, much more powerful. So the Rebbe shows you literally a Kabbalistic map when the Torah says it's going to add a blessing. So there's two components. One is the Rebbe explained that when you practice of the 3 years of restraint, and that's the way you elevate it, so you connect to Kesach Chachmina. So then in the 5th year, where are you connecting to? You're connected to Kodesh Shel Yud, you're connecting to what? To the Kesach Chachmina. Versus all the other mitzvahs, like it says in the Zohar, you're connecting either to the Yud, the Hey, the Vav Hey. And that's why the reward is on a lower level. And that's why the verse finishes off and it says, Ani Hashem. Why? Since you're connecting to the Kodesh Shel Yud, Kesach Chachmina, so you're connecting to above Ishtalshlos, above the flow of all the spheroids. So therefore, you need to have the promise, a specific promise from Hashem that it's not enough that we should connect to it. The goal is to bring it down. So that's why the Torah says, "Ani Hashem, I am Hashem," and that causes it to come literally into this world. Now. How does this all happen? So it all happens, again, to recap, to go back to the main point, it happens when we do the transformation by practicing restraint. And when you practice your restraint, you draw down the lights which is above Ishtalshalos. Now, so that's what we're reaching. We're reaching a very high level. But the goal is to do what? Not just to keep it up there, to bring it down to this world. How do you bring it down to this world? Through the avodah, which is called tikkun. You want to bring it down to this world. Because the fact is, the koitzei shel Yud, like we learned, is Keser. And Keser is one of the spheres of Tayu. But the goal is it should be drawn down and revealed in the avodah of tikkun, in this world. How do we bring it into this world? We bring it into this world through the 4 letters of Yud, Kei, Yud, and the Hey and the Vav Hey. Up to literally the last letter, which we know the last letter is the one that spreads it all out all over. And that's the whole idea of the 4 years. In other words, the 3 years of the Orla, where you can't have any benefits, and the 4th year where there's restrictions, and then you reach the level of the 5th year Kodesh Shel Yud. So the Rebbe is explaining it beautifully, saying as follows. The goal is, we want to reach the highest level, but we have to bring it down into this world. So that's why the setup is clearly to, that's why there's a 4 year and a 5th year, because basically by practicing restraint, we're reaching the highest level, but the goal then is to bring it down to this world, and the way we bring it down to this world is by having a process of 4 years, which is connecting Yud Kei Vav Kei, which brings it down to this world. And the Rebbe says this is also the general idea of the soul coming down into our body. In other words, as we know, when the soul comes down to the body, there's 4 different levels in the way the soul comes down into the body. Like we said clearly, we say every single morning, what does it say? Neshama shenasati, be the soul that you gave me, tahirahi, it's pure, after barasa, after yitzarta, after nafachtabi. So you see the soul is coming down 4 levels. But the goal is not that the soul should come down and get stuck down here. The goal is to come down here and elevate the world. And as when it comes down the 4 levels, the goal is to elevate not just back to from Nefachta to Yitzarta to Barasa to Tahiri. The goal is to go to even higher than Tahira. They're higher than the place of souls before. And where's the higher level? The higher level is like the which is the 5th level, which is higher than the 4 levels. And how does this happen? It happens when the soul comes down to the body, and just like the example of the vessels, like the Rebbe explained before. So in other words, the Rebbe is saying like this. This whole idea, we learned about the experience of the 4 years of Arla applies to us as well. Because we come down to this world, the Neshama came down 4 levels, but the goal is to transform and elevate and go to even a higher place. So based on Rebbe explains why it says, Ki tevואו al הארץ, when you come to the land, what was it referring to? It's referring to the soul coming down to the body. And the whole goal is that we should go ahead, we should plant fruit trees. And what does that mean, fruit trees? We should make this world a dwelling place for Hashem. And how do we make a dwelling place for Hashem? When we come down into the 4 levels and then we transform the world. But the goal is, again, to transform it and reach a higher place. And when we transform the world, what happens is the soul itself gets elevated. And that's on a personal journey. But the same applies to generally the Jewish people. In other words, when the Jewish people came to the land of Israel, that was the beginning of our spiritual work. Why? Because when we were in the desert, that was only preparation for our spiritual work. But when did the real work start of making the world a dwelling place for Hashem? That's specifically when we came into the land of Israel. When we went ahead and we were transforming the world by planting and sowing and creating literally fruit trees that were able to produce fruit. And then we go and eat it, which means that we internalize it. And the fruit become part of our blood, and becomes part of our flesh. As a matter of fact, as we know, that was the complaint of the Meraglim, of the spies. They didn't want to go into the land of Israel. Why? Because they didn't want to have the downgrade and to deal with the physical world. But the truth is, we know that the Toiva, Aretz, the world is very, very good. And it's just twice good. In other words, specifically by going into the land of Israel and working the land, that is the ultimate work that we can have, and that's the true elevation that for our soul. The Rebbe says this is also the spiritual work of Sfiras Eimer, the counting number between Pesach and Shavuot, because it says in the prophets, what does it say? It says, Mashcheni acharecha v'narutza. So first it says, Mashcheni, draw, and it says singular. Why singular? Because initially Mashcheni is referring to the godly soul. But afterwards, Narutza, who runs after Hashem, plural? If it's only the godly soul, how do you have plural? And the answer is because the godly soul initially is one drawing. The godly soul is schlepping, making it happen. But then Narutza, the goal is that there's 2 people running, the godly soul and the animal soul. Because the animal soul gets transformed and is on the same mission as the godly soul. And that's why the gift that's coming from Sfiras Eimer is specifically from barley, which is food which animals eat, because the goal is to transform the animal part of the human being, and from there we make food out of wheat that people eat, that we are called obviously Adam, and through that we do our spiritual work of transforming the physical world and transforming our animal soul. We come to the part where it says in the prophets, Havi'ani HaMelech HaDorav, God brings me into his chambers. When did that happen? In Matan Torah. Because then when we have the Torah, when we're learning Torah, now we're one with Hashem. Literally, and the Rebbe says it in Yiddish, when you learn Torah, you're literally one with the king. And this is also a preparation for the ultimate redemption. Because we know Matan Torah is not going to be again. We only had Matan Torah once. And there was again in Yiddish, Nocham Mol Matan Torah in Zion. It's not going to be Matan Torah again. So therefore, Matan Torah is a preparation for the revelation of the Torah of Mashiach. And that happens how? By us transforming our animal soul. And when we come into the land specifically, and we go into God's chamber, and God reveals all the secrets Up to the point where it finishes off, we're going to receive the Torah, besimcha, with joy, and pnimius, and in an eternal way. So again, we have another beautiful Chassidic discourse where the Rebbe explains the whole idea of Orla. I think it creates a whole new level in the power of restraint, which has the power to bring down the highest levels and to realize what our avoid in this world is, to transform our animal soul, and then we'll connect to God in the highest levels, and we'll all merit for the coming of Mashiach, and we'll receive the highest level of Torah, besimcha, b'primius. Let's hope and pray that our next class is in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Have a great and blessed week. Shavua Tov.